Hello, everybody. Here we are, week number 4, chapter 7. Only got one chapter this week, in part because we have a CRA due this week and then starting on number 2. And people are, I'm sure, trying to get caught up. We've got midterms coming up for some folks, and we want to make sure that everybody has time to digest and to process so that you can do as well as you possibly can. And to get you a little bit thinking more, got another 3-minute essay this week. And these 3-minute essays, again, are not to be editorials. They're to be self-reflection through the lens of sociology. So remember, sociology is taking that step back and looking at life, the society, your family, your network, yourself, as objectively as possible. Remember, making the normal strange. So when you are answering these questions, which seem personal in nature, but really I'm asking, the topic you know most about is yourself. However, I'm not looking for you to give me an editorial or a personal feeling map. I'm asking you to do self-analysis sociologically, which means you're going to need to understand your social location and how factors at the meso and macro level are impacting your life at the micro level, how you are being impacted by other people at the micro level, and then how you are impacting the meso and macro levels, right? It's all that going on at the same time. This is what I want you to be able to do, like second nature, from learning sociology. So, considering ourselves as members of a context that we are looking into from the outside, how life turns out is because, why? I've given you 5 options here. If you come up with something else, that's perfectly fine too. Just please be sure to give, if you have more than one, and you probably should, I mean, how many people are going to have only one? Maybe, but if you have only one, give a really good reason. And if you have more than one, which most people will, make sure you give a percentage value and explain your list. And again, this is not to be editorial or necessarily autobiographical. This is to be analytical. Last week's 3-minute essay on political correctness was fascinating. It always is. I always enjoy that one, reading responses. The definition is what it is. I mean, words mean things. And part of my point behind asking your agreement or disagreement is that if different people have different definitions for words, we cannot communicate effectively at best. At worst, we cause division and chaos. And so if we have the Oxford English Dictionary provide a definition, and I encourage you to go read the preface to the Oxford English Dictionary to find out how they go about coming up with definitions for words. And even go back 20 years, go back 50 years, go back 100 years. I mean, it's a wonderful things about a tool like the Oxford English Dictionary. You can go back generations to find out how their methodology has changed. And there's been some very significant ways that it has not changed, it's remained the same, which is one reason why I use the Oxford English Dictionary, because it has not changed very much. It has changed according to certain political winds at certain times, but the core methodology has remained intact, which is comforting. So be careful about definitions. The content differentiation of political correctness between groups, that seems to be given, that a different group is going to have a different focus on life, the universe, and everything, and therefore will have different topics, verbiage, body language, about which it seems to be untenable or unacceptable for whatever reason. And then, of course, but the rules, oftentimes different groups who have different content for the political correctness actually employ similar rules. or there could be different rules. There's a little more leeway on that. So please keep that in mind when you're doing a 3-minute essay, that it's being analytical, that we're looking at these topics in this way. Hopefully that's helpful. We also have an assignment coming up this week, theory matching. I'm going to give you a phrase, and you are going to then provide to me the answer, and there's only 3 possible answers. Every single assignment that you will receive from me this semester, preceding assignments. That's why some of you on the video analysis and game analysis, you didn't get any credit for providing a theory because you didn't use one of the 3 major theories, which I have stated since lecture 1. There's only 3 possible answers for a theory: functionalism, symbolic interactionism, or conflict theory. Those are the only 3 theories. There are so many nuances of these theories that if you do actually know what you're talking about when you say feminism, but then there's subcategories of feminism, and you can match it to the correct core theory and write out a very good explanation at the right level of analysis, that'd be great. And I might even give you XP. But unless you're sure you can do that, please don't. Please just stick to the basic 3 core theories and provide your answer based on the theory, the aspects of the theory, the level of analysis. A little bit of housekeeping in order to do assignments well. In other words, if you want to get an A or a B instead of a C or less, please do the readings first. Make sure you understand them. Make sure you ask me if you don't understand them. Ask a classmate who you think is understanding things better than you. Then view the lectures. Listen to the lectures at least if you don't view them, and please take notes. Because remember, I go beyond the textbook. I'm not simply rehashing the textbook. It's funny that I'm saying this in the lecture because those of you who are not watching the lecture are not going to hear it anyway. Yeah, I just realized that. Also, please do your best to meet with each of your instructors, including me, at least once during the semester, preferably early on. It's going to help me get to know you, understand you better, and be able to give you better feedback on your assignments and with other things relating to the course and to school life and the universe and everything. A little more housekeeping. CRA number 2 is due Monday, March 6th by 7 p.m. Remember, there's 4 required. Remember, you must turn in number 1. You must provide references. You must you must not use Wikipedia or anything that is not an actual academic, government, or NGO reference. Quotes need a reference, but don't need to be academic necessarily, but you still have to provide a citation for the quote. So when you get information from an outside source or from the article I give you, that all needs to be referenced. When you have a quote, it needs to have an in-text citation. When you have an idea, it needs to have an in-text citation. Make sure you review the lecture from last week on writing and how to effectively write. We've got another lecture coming up on writing as well. Well, last week's lecture was on CRAs. This week's lecture is going to be on writing. And you may want to review that first before you move on to the next CRA. And also do, and that's what I was talking about here, the writing review slides. Check out the Writing for Success Handbook. That may be of help as well. All right, getting into it. Chapter 7, Conformity, Deviance, and Crime. It's fascinating. Most of the sociology full-time tenure track jobs at universities these days are focused on deviance and criminal studies. I'm really not sure why. It's fascinating material, fascinating topic. Not my personal forte, but we're going to get into it a bit here today. Lots to talk about. And of course, we're going to start with the video.
Chapter 6, Social Control and Deviance. Paradox. It is the deviants among us who hold society together. Social cohesion refers to the extent to which society holds together without dissolving into conflict. That is, to how well people relate to each other and get along. Any transgression of the established norms of a group is called social deviance. When an individual commits an act of deviance, he disrupts the collective conscience, or the moral code that we're all accustomed to following. When broken, societies must face and repair the breach in order to return to the way they were. This is usually accomplished by one of two approaches: punishment or rehabilitation. Collectively, people unite in this process of punishment or rehabilitation, not only through formal means such as court trials, but also through informal means such as gossip. So, by defining and making public what is not acceptable, it is the deviant who, ironically, by causing moral offense and its attendant response, actually holds society together. Tell that to your parents next time you get into trouble.
It's a very good point that by getting in trouble, you're actually bringing your parents together, which actually keeps family cohesion intact. This is a fascinating photo. U.S. soldier, obviously part of a formal operation to maintain order, is guarding contraband, bricks of illicit drugs. And the question is, what makes the bricks of illicit drugs deviant? And what makes him conforming? Is it simply the perspective from which we are viewing the individual and the items? Perhaps. And our question of the chapter goes to that. Members of the mafia commit crimes in order to terrorize, become respectable, extort, destroy communities. Well, you may be surprised, but actually the answer is B. Members of organized crime, yes, there's an attraction to the money and the power and the fame. But what's actually going on is an attempt to normalize themselves within society and become respected and respectable. Oftentimes, professional criminals will become members of normal society without the crime. And for a variety of reasons, they did not go that way to begin with. And we're going to get into that why. Part of that is personality. Part of it is socialization. Part of it is simply due to the choices available at the time when one is looking for opportunity. So looking at our basic concepts, we're going to learn how to define deviance, how it's related to social power and class, recognize the ways in which conformity is encouraged. We're going to look how we analyze these theoretically. We're going to look at some of the research and, of course, unanswered questions. So basic concepts, we need to know what are norms. Norms are a thing. Norms are what makes social life possible by making behavior predictable. And basically, they're the rules of conduct. Those are norms. Social norms are rules of conduct. They're either prescribed for something you should do or against something you should not do. It can be as mundane as don't wear white after Labor Day. I think that's a Southern thing. Or it could be as formal as when you're driving more than 20 miles over the speed limit, you are not going to get just a ticket. You're going to get cited for reckless endangerment, and you may have your vehicle towed away, your driver's license revoked, and you may actually have to serve prison time for it. And then, of course, everything in between and beyond. So these norms are always backed by some sort of sanction. Now, a sanction can be, as according to the video, formal or informal. When you step outside of social norms and make a very poor taste joke in the wrong set of people, an informal sanction, punishment, maybe they all turn around and leave you by yourself, and you have no idea what you just did. And of course, formal is that police officer pulling you over, giving you a ticket, asking you to get out of the car and please get into, not please, and you will get into the back of his car and be taken to a station for processing. So there's always going to be norms that are sanctioned as appropriate or receive a sanction, meaning a penalty for being inappropriate and deviating from what is expected. So again, informal and formal norms both have informal and formal enforcement and consequences. And what this adds up to is social control. Humans are wired to desire not chaos, but order. We are wired to desire to be able to understand and to predict what's going to happen in any given situation. We get very nervous. Our anxiety level rises. Our ability to cope decreases when we come into a situation where we have not been, because we do not know the rules, we do not know how to act, we do not know how to respond to other people, we don't know what their expectations are of us. However, when we're in an environment where we know all of those things, we are at peace, we're calm, we appreciate the order, and we're going to co-enforce that social order, which brings order rather than bringing chaos. The opposite concept, of course, is deviance, where we don't conform to norms or values held by the majority of other members of the society where we find ourselves. What's deviant is as variable as the norms. In some societies or in a subculture, what is deviant is not the same as in the larger culture. So for example, in the larger culture, for most of my life, not recently, but for most of my life, smoking marijuana, using marijuana in any way was deviant in the larger culture, but not in certain subcultures. Today, that's changed, and it's actually not deviant throughout most of the larger culture, but is deviant in many subcultures. So it's kind of flipped on its head. And again, the sanctions have changed. The formal and informal sanctions and approvals have changed. Behavior highly seen by one group may be regarded very negatively by another group. Understanding how to entertain, how to be funny has changed. If you simply look at the content of the Late Show, going from, oh goodness, his name just flew out of my head. I can actually hear his voice. But say to David Letterman, even to today, I mean, David Letterman was 20 years ago. And then moving on to today, the late night TV shows have changed incredibly in the acceptable humor and the acceptable targets of the humor. Note that every time a joke is told, there is a victim. There's no such thing as a victimless joke. Therefore, as we have become a more politically correct society where political divisions are more extreme and sharp, we have changed the humor that is allowed in society as a whole. And people are sanctioned, they are canceled as a formal or I mean, that could be, a cancellation can be formal or informal. Think about it. Then yes, there are minor transgressions that are informal, and you could say a major transgression is a formal, but not necessarily. It's a bit of a subjective call at that point. But a formal, if we're calling something formal deviance, it usually involves a violation of law. So we also have laws and we have crimes. And you can see here in this very useful chart, Venn diagram, there's deviance and there's crime. And then there's the overlap between deviance and crime. And underage drinking, of course, is deviance from the norm, but it's not in the overlap because it's not something where there's going to be, it's something where there's an acceptable place to do it in some circumstances. Exceeding the speed limit is acceptable in some circumstances, right? If you are being chased by somebody who wants to kill you, please exceed the speed limit. Underage drinking, technically in a Jewish home on Friday night or at Passover, people under 18 are probably going to be partaking of some wine. And while it is technically a crime in some areas. Well, I mean, if you're in your parents' home, I mean, and we're getting into technicalities here, I probably shouldn't have gone in there. But anyway, it's technically crime, but it's actually not deviant. So here, though, these are both deviant and criminal. Hope that makes sense. Howard Becker famously said, it's not the act itself, but the reaction to the act that makes something deviant. So that would have been better if we go back to the Venn diagram, that the reaction to these events makes it deviant. And then here, it may not be deviant depending upon the circumstances. So hopefully that works out better. Anyway, so a couple of examples that I like to give here. Teutonic tribes, Germanic tribes, 1500 years ago, the Romans the fall of Rome was due in part to trying to defeat, and then they couldn't defeat, and they tried to work with and definitely couldn't work with the Teutonic tribes. Why? Because outside of the tribal group, murder was not only something good because you're defeating your enemies, it was something that was expected and a rite of passage, that a young man became a young man on his first kill, not of an animal, but of another human being. To the civilized Roman culture, this was unfathomable because there were supposed to be rules for war, rules for prisoners, which we have inherited from the Greeks and the Romans. But the Teutonic tribes did not share that understanding of humane treatment of the other. So to them, the deviance that the Romans saw in them, and that most of us would, I would hope, will view that their behavior and their understanding of what brings about good society through the utter destruction of every other society and the murder of one's enemies or even one's other tribe, it was normal for them, deviant for us. So it's only deviant when you see it's deviant. Convents, women who have taken vows of celibacy, maybe of silence, of work, also of prayer and devotion, that's deviant regarding the larger culture. And how do we know? Because people will react to it and say, oh, I could never do that. And they might react positively to say, how wonderful it is that these women are able to do that. I can't do it. So it's still deviant because it's not something that people are buying into. But it's receiving sanction in that it's okay. Or that's sanction is one of those words where it can be negative or positive. It's receiving approval. It's not receiving a penalty. So both are deviant, but one is something we totally avoid and we penalize. We penalize people who wantonly kill and consider psychologically unbalanced for those who kill to prove a point or to make themselves more of a person. Yet we approve of, support, but do not necessarily join people who take on a very intense religious way of life. Deviant subcultures, members hold values that differ from those of the majority. Pretty straightforward. Could be a singular value like ink, could be a set of values like a religious cult, and sometimes a subculture can cease to be and join the majority culture. Mormonism. 1850s Mormonism was very, very much a subculture that was considered deviant by the vast majority of American Christians and Jews. And it was even held up as a reason Utah should not be admitted as a state. Utah was, of course, admitted as a state because the state assembly actually made illegal on the books some Mormon practices, such as polygamy, but then turned their eye when it would actually happen. However, as happens, people in deviant subcultures often desire to be part of the larger culture for a variety of reasons. Could be access to resources, could be simple integration into society and feeling normal and less chaotic on one's own and more integrated into society, bringing more order. And so they sought to become more like Protestant Christianity, which they have largely done in practice, if not in theology. And so now they are no longer considered by many Christians to be a deviant subculture, just a different part of Christianity that is neither Catholic nor Protestant, but something else. So here we go with these, with the word that I've been using, sanction. It's a mode of reward or punishment, right? It can be positive. You're going to sanction something. You're going to say it's okay. You're going to reward it, and you're going to approve of it. Or you're going to place a sanction against somebody for doing something negative. And it can be formal or informal, either way. Another important phrase, term, social cohesion, the way people form bonds. And the video we just saw, when you're well embedded into a network, you can either have strong bonds, those strong links, or you can have weak links. And remember, it's the weak link between networks that provides new resources, but the weak link within a network is often not helpful, and it probably means that there is a deviance on one side or the other of that link. And so we are continually looking within our network to gain an understanding of the conformity and the deviance of the various members of the network. If somebody needs a formal, well, probably not a formal sanction, because then you go outside your network to the law enforcement, but it needs an informal sanction, or somebody needs to be sanctioned of approval, and then their deviance is no longer, but it's accepted. I hope this is clear. Emil Durkheim theorized, and Durkheim's he had a lot of good ideas that are socially accurate, and through his research and the research of those who came after him demonstrated to be very true in the majority. So social cohesion, how we strengthen those bonds within our network. This can be done. We can strengthen social cohesion either through mechanical solidarity or organic solidarity. Now it's not intuitive, these two terms. Mechanical solidarity is based on the sameness of society's parts, but has nothing to do with mechanics. Okay, organic solidarity is based on the interdependence or specialization of the parts, but has nothing to do with farming or how we use the word organic in terms of produce. And I've had trouble with that word ever since it came to be popular in use in the 90s, because it's organic. The original term means that it's a carbon-based, and I learned that in junior high in carbon-based chemistry. Something is organic if it has a carbon element. But organic solidarity is, meaning that something's coming about naturally, something is coming about without outside aid, something that doesn't need anything other than itself to propagate, is actually what we see like not in the Amish case, because this is actually mechanical, because people are more like each other than different. The families share more values between themselves. The communities are more bounded with their religion and with their lifestyle, and people have similar goals from day to day, month to month, year to year. However, organic society is that modern day. It's because we have interdependence, but everybody's got their own specialization. Some people are farming just chickens to get just eggs and maybe some meat. Other people are building software applications in order to facilitate our virtual environment, but they have nothing to do with the hardware on which the software runs. Whereas other people are building the hardware and improving the speed and the efficiency of that hardware. And other people are working on the security measures to keep the hardware and the software secure and safe from predators or from the prying eyes of, say, governments. So that is the organic aspect, where people don't know each other, but they're all interconnected and interdependent I go to the grocery store. I have no idea where the milk comes from, but I'm so glad there's somebody who did produce that milk and brought it to the store so I can buy it and put it in my milk and put it in my cereal. But I have no idea who they are. That is an organic society. Mechanical society, I go to the store. I know exactly where that milk came from. It came from Farmer Brown down the street, who has a contract with the store to sell his milk to the store. But we could also go directly to Farmer Brown if we wanted to, because I'd actually rather have the buttermilk that his wife makes with her secret recipe rather than getting the homogenized milk that he gives to the store. So understand that these are counterintuitive, but it's very important that you understand the distinction between mechanical solidarity, where people are largely on the same page, and organic solidarity, where people are connected, but they don't even know each other. They have no idea. Now let's talk about state-imposed sanctions, which we all know, right? We got the man, the guy in the suit with the badge and the tie and the hat and the sidearm. Punitive justice. Focus on punishing the violator for the offense. That's the focus. Whereas rehabilitative justice examines specific circumstances and attempts to find ways to rehabilitate the offender. So you offend society's norms by going into a mini mart and taking a candy bar off the shelf and not paying for it. And the guy behind the counter pushes the little button, the police car drives up. He was only 30 seconds away anyway. You decide not to run, probably wise. You're arrested, booked for theft, taken before a judge who says, what were you thinking? And your answer may depend on whether you get punitive justice or rehabilitative justice. Officer, I haven't eaten anything for 4 days. I have no place to live. I'm very sorry. I shouldn't have done it. He's going to get you a different penalty than, I just got off of work and I was feeling good, in a good mood, and I took it on, sorry, sir, I don't know why I didn't pay for it. Okay, you got 30 days of jail. Fortunately, in our court system, most judges take the opportunity for their leeway to deliver punitive or rehabilitative justice. We have a huge discussion in our country about jails and about penalties, and can't get into that here. We're talking just about the definitions, not the detailed operationalization of what goes on with deviance and social control. Informal sanctions, unspoken rules and expectations about people's behavior, maintain a base level of order, but when somebody steps outside, they're going to receive some sort of informal sanction like shunning, or laughed at, or a talking to. A parental discipline of a child is an informal sanction within the formal institution of the family. So it's still informal. Formal always involves an authority, an organized authority structure, which you could argue the parents are, but it's considered informal. Also because then later, right? Most people, parents, grandparents, you get the look, and that's all you need. And you stepped out of line. You were deviant, and you probably know what you did. You just get the look, and then you get back in line. Now that's informal, and we do that to each other too. When we get to know close friends, and you get to know their personality and their body language, and you go, "Oh my gosh, he did that. I did something. What did I do?" They say, and they don't even realize that they're giving you an informal sanction. So take a look at these guys walking down the street. Which one is the deviant? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. Well, the deviant is the guy with the red tie and the brown shoes and the suit. Because look, the other two guys, they got dark coats but gray slacks. And they both have gray shoes to match. And they're not, we got a kind of gray tie and a blue tie and darker shirts. This guy, he's standing out with his red tie and his white shirt and his full suit, but brown shoes. He's the deviant one. That's easy. He's probably not going to get sanctioned for anything, although they might laugh at him. Didn't you get the memo? That's an informal sanction. When you got clothes on that don't match everybody else, Didn't you get the memo? You know, it's funny, we laugh, but it is a type of informal sanction. Conformity is something that, on the one hand, Americans pride themselves at not being, because we like to think we're all individuals. The video that I showed first week. Yes, we're all individuals. You know, it's hilarious. We think we are, but we're so conforming. We've been that way because, and that's because we're humans. When we conform, we reduce the opportunity to receive a sanction. We reduce the opportunity to be considered bringers of chaos into the system. We reduce the opportunity to be called out and then be isolated from our network, from our society, reduce the opportunity that will weaken the links to the other members of our network. We want those strong connections. We want to be well enmeshed in our network, in our society. And so we are wired to not be deviant, but we think we're individuals. And so I've got these 3 very fun videos showing how American individualism has changed from 1984 to 2008 until 2020. Here's 2004.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification. All is starting with pure ideology, ready to work by the blue, secure from the pests, array from the future.
This is, of course, the movie 1984 from the book 1984, which is about complete conformity of all society under the aegis of Big Brother on the screen, who is telling you what to think, what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And if you step outside any of those boundaries of confirmation, you will be sanctioned by death, essentially. And so this is the advent of the Apple computer saying, we are not going to be conforming to the standards of IBM.
We are one will, one resolve, one purpose.
January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Classic. I had a ton of conversation. I graduated from high school in 1984, and we had great conversations over that commercial. So here is from 2008. It was an election year. We had just gone through 26 years of basically conforming executives in the White House, from Ronald Reagan to George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton, who was really George Bush light, to George Bush. And well, here, now you can see what this candidate was trying to tell you.
1 month ago, I began a conversation with all of you, and so far, we haven't stopped talking, and that's really good. I intend to keep telling you exactly where I stand on all of the issues.
I'm looking at how you and other people who are hardworking like you, and I
Notice we're still with the 1984 motif in 2008, 24 years later. Notice who is being portrayed as Big Brother, Hillary Clinton.
have really been impressed by how serious people are.
Because we all need to be part of the discussion. We're all going to be part of the solution.
I don't want people who already agree with me. I want honest, experienced, hardworking, patriotic people who want to be part of a team, the American team. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what I'm believing and trying to do, and really helped this conversation about our country to get started.
I hope to keep this conversation going.
See the logo? It's not an Apple logo. It's an Obama campaign logo.
Way, November 2008.
So this is a message of multiple meanings. 2008 won't be like 1984, the book, because we're going to allow people to think for themselves. 2008 won't be like 1984, the year when the Democratic Party basically put up Walter Mondale, who couldn't talk his way out of a paper bag. And 2008 won't be like 1984 because Hillary Clinton is just part of the same old thing, referring back to Bill Clinton's presidency. So totally, it wanted to, okay, here's American individualism. Finally, we're going to have it with Obama. People are going to be able to break out of that conformity trap. Well, let's go on and see if we have become any more individuals in 2020. And yeah, we're in 2023, but this is from 2020. See if, you know, moving forward another 12 years made any difference whatsoever.
The Ash experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. So for example,
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1, 1.
1. 2.
1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
Now we've already seen this. This is a little bit different perspective, but notice who's the deviant? The deviant is the one who's not conforming to the wrong answer. He's still deviant, even though he's correct. That is something very important to understand with this example and to the concept of deviance in total. Just because somebody is deviant does not mean that they are factually, conceptually, ethically wrong. It simply means they're not conforming to the norms and expectations of a given society or subgroup.
3. 3. 3. 3. 3.
So he just gave up. Sure, I'll go along. I'll tell everybody 2 + 2 is 5. Sure.
The Ash experiment has been repeated many times and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat. So we will go along with the group. Even if we don't believe what people are saying, we'll still go along.
1. 1. 1. 1.
Group dynamics is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology.
1. 1.
War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Again, I encourage you to read 1984 if you have not. The movie is a acceptable secondary. But note that we now are allowing the studies which demonstrate masks do almost nothing for most people in most circumstances to not be censured or canceled. I did my own research on this in 2020 on the mask issue and was saying, hey guys, unless you are wearing a properly fitted N95 mask without facial hair and around in a good setting where there's already good hygiene and cleanliness, it's not really going to do you a lot of good. I was canceled. I was canceled from places that I had been going for decades. And there were other people who came out with similar research findings, and their stories were not allowed to be published. Some of them were removed from Twitter, from Facebook, so forth and so on. Well, now we know it's true that actually, even in an operating surgical center, that the mask worn should be disposed of, even if it is a properly 40 N95. They're disposed of after each use, not continually worn. Why? Because CO2 being breathed in, breathing in your own germs, not having fresh air, bad for the person wearing it. We also know that it's more to prevent the people in the operating room who actually are dealing with people with open cavities to prevent inhaling blood in large molecule sizes of body products, not germs per se. And a recent paper just this week saying, yeah, we studied 15 studies, all of which had really good stats methodology, and no, a mask is not going to help you out in public. Not saying don't wear it, you can do what you like, but we're conforming to a standard is something totally different from saying that you are operating with knowledge and science. You actually have to know the science to say you're operating according to the science. Most of us, we comply. We're going to buy the Apple, we're going to buy the Macintosh, we're going to buy the iPhone. Even though we're really against slavery, it doesn't matter that Apple and other companies are using what amounts of slave labor in order to build their products in China. And people like me who ask these questions, don't ask those questions, Sam. We're not even going to talk about it because I want this, basically is what it comes down to. So I'm used to being sanctioned for asking questions people don't want to discuss. and actually, yeah, I enjoy it. Moving on, please don't be a conformist, I guess is my message, for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons, if you can find them. So anyway, looking at this theologically, sociologically, under our three theories, let's take a look at the functionalist point of view on deviance. So Emil Durkheim, he asked, can deviance be functional? And from the original video we saw, yes, deviance actually helps to bring society together and keep people connected. It affirms moral boundaries, promotes social unity. Deviance promotes social change. Because when we say, oh, this is going back to the cannabis example, we are changing society based on our view of the deviance of using cannabis, based on science and research. Now, the science is not closed. It's not settled. Science literally is never settled. Don't let anybody ever tell you that. There's always a possibility of finding a different value for a different variable than we've ever found before that's going to change what we have as operational theories. Right? I mean, Einstein discovered that gravity is not the same everywhere, every time. Neither is time the same everywhere, every time. So we have to be careful with what we say is settled science. And enemy. Enemy is a very important concept. I brought it up here a couple other times. A situation in which social norms lose their hold over individual behavior. Usually this comes in with too much choice. That when I have so many choices to make, I feel as though I don't have any boundaries. I don't have any norms of my own to keep me from doing whatever I want to do. And so I become uneasy within my own self, within my own society, my own context. And people who have a sense of enemy, where they don't have social norms and boundaries that are constraining them, have greater instances of suicidal tendency, actual suicide, psychological disabilities, and psychological dysfunction. Enemy is not a good thing. And again, it comes about by having too many choices, not good boundaries, and being deviant to the norm, and that deviance becoming normal for the individual. So also please note, functionalism is a tool at the macro level. Be sure to frame the situation at the macro level if you choose to use functionalism for a theoretical frame. So functionalist theories on deviance, Robert Merton, he said that people engage in deviant behavior when they cannot choose not to achieve socially approved goals by legitimate means. Okay, so a social goal at the functional macro level, or through the functional lens of the macro level, a goal would be to become independently wealthy. Well, there are legitimate means and there are illegitimate means by which the vast majority of American citizens can achieve that goal, may achieve that goal, not can, may achieve that goal. Deviance is a result of the strain an individual feels when he or she cannot make that achievement in society standards of norms. So that person says, yes, I want to become independently wealthy. I've tried working 40 hours a week. I've tried working 80 hours a week. I've tried getting 2 or 3 degrees. I still can't get there. Well, maybe I can get it by breaking into the little lady's house down the street, and I know that she keeps $10,000 under her bed. $10,000 really isn't that much these days, but maybe it's a start. So you're going to go from accepted norms that you can't, by which you can't achieve the goal, to deviance by which maybe you will achieve the goal. Of course, we do have structural factors of opportunity and availability, and cultural factors of inequality of emphasis, and whether something is successful, is legitimate, or is it not? Or are we simply trying to gain legitimization for ourselves as opposed to success? Sometimes earning that extra paycheck is how you think you are going to, or you not think, you believe you're going to gain access to your community of desire. We often see this in marriage, really, because when you marry an individual, you marry a whole family. And maybe that family has had a certain lifestyle for generations. Your desire to get wealthy isn't because you want to achieve a certain level of success by society nationwide. You are trying to gain legitimacy as a member of this family by having a check of a certain level, having a bank account of a certain level. So interesting how we can look at the choices we make based on more than one reference group. It could be the societal reference group, it could be the family reference group, it could be a business reference group. There's a number of different ways to look at that, and so you may be deviant against one aspect of your culture, but not against another. Depends on the reference group in question. And then again, we could go into relative deprivation. A person feels when he compares himself to a group, and like that family, the married in family, where you think, I don't have the experience, the money they do, so I can't take my kids to Europe once a year, an African experience, Machu Picchu, the Aleutian Islands, like my in-laws took their kids and my wife now expects. So I'm feeling deprived because I can't live up to that standard. So I might take a deviant option in order to get there. So here's Morton's deviance typology, that if we take here's the cultural goal, and we can conform, we can reject our cultural goals. institutionalized means to get there, we can go into innovation and reject. We can reject the typical cultural conformity, but get to the goal. We can retreat away from it, and we're going to reject both the goal and the means. Or we can completely rebel, and we can find new goals and new means totally. So we're rejecting the goals, rejecting the means, or some aspect of accepting the goal, accepting the means, innovating the means, innovating a goal, or we can retreat and become our own person, or we can try to create a new society, basically. So let's look at this in a little bit closer. Conformists accept the goals of the society and the means of achieving those goals. So that's the guy in the green up here, right? He completely accepts everything. The innovator, however, they accept the goals of society, but they look for new innovative ways to achieving the goals. So they're going to reject the accepted ways of achieving the goal while accepting the goal itself and come up with a new way to get there. So rather than merely accepting that wealth and political influence is a great thing, and since he couldn't do it through going to college, Bill Gates got together with folks in a garage and said, you know, let's develop an electronic device that is going to provide more instant gratification, more reliable data to more people, and they're going to pay us to do it. And that way I'm going to get money and political influence. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I think, is one of the most influential foundations in the world today. So that innovation made the goal through a different way that had never been done before. Ritualists is that I don't need the goal, but the means, well, okay, I'll work. I'm not trying to get anywhere, but you know what? I'd rather sit around playing video games. And so I'm going to do the work. I'm going to do what my parents expect me to do. But then I'm going to come home and I'm going to do whatever I want. So basically they're pretending. They're pretending to conform when they actually aren't. So that's the ritual. I'm going to go through the ritual of saying, good morning, how are you? I don't really mean it. I'm just doing it because it's what's expected of me, and I'm not trying to get anything out of it. I'm just going through the motions, and then I'm going to do whatever I want to anyway. The retreatists, they're not going to accept the goals. They're going to accept the means of achieving the goals, right? They're literally going to get their broken down green bus, and they're going to live out in the middle of the woods. And they're not going to be conforming to anybody's idea of either goals or achievement. So they're going to make their own goals, if any, and they're going to come up with their own way of achieving their own goals or not. So those are those four aspects. Going back to that slide real quick. I'm either going to conform both to the goals and the means. I'm going to accept the goals, come up with a different way of making the means. I'm going to say, okay, fine, I'll do what you want me to do on a day-to-day basis, but I don't care about your goals. Or I'm just going to retreat from society, become my own person. Now, then we have the rebellion. Yes. Che Guevara, not a guy who is known as a very good person, but held up as a rebel, a nonconformist, who not only didn't accept the goals of the society, but created their own goals using new means in order to create a new society based on those goals and those means. The American founders were called rebels by the British for good reason, because they did not appreciate the goals of British society, which was conformity to the crown and allowing the crown, and actually it wasn't King George, it was King George's advisors. So that crown used very large respect, not just a person. Our founders did not want to conform to and obey the crown. They wanted to have their own form of government, their own form of accountability, their own form of economics, and to break those bonds that kept them a part of that British Commonwealth network. And so they rebelled. They had new goals that were written out in the Declaration of Independence, and they created a way of obtaining those goals through active as well as passive resistance to the British. That's one of the better examples of rebels. There are others across the spectrum of what I would call good and bad. So that's strain theory, and it goes along with functionalism. Now, symbolic interactionism, remember, this is at the micro level of analysis, examining beliefs and assumptions that people bring to their everyday interactions and find causes for explanations for deviance. So again, it's micro. You need to be able to frame the situation at the micro level and be able to talk about symbols, actual things that people see and interpret and respond to in that situation when you're talking about symbolic interactionism. So be careful of that. So we're talking about what assumptions people bring into their everyday lives and how they might respond to the assumptions of others in deviant ways. So let's look at what may happen. A kid, 12 years old, 13 years old, he's got a friend and they get in an argument. And they get in a big argument and neither of them win. Kid number B goes home. Kid number A, I know I've got the wrong one. Letter A. Kid number A, he sits in his backyard and he stews and he stews. And then he looks and he sees a rock. And he thinks about the rock and he thinks about his friend's head. And so he takes that rock and he walks down the street and he sees his friend's bedroom and he sees his friend's head inside the bedroom and he throws the rock. He has just now created an act of deviance in his behavior and thus influence how people will think and act toward him, right? That he did something wrong, he needs to rectify it, he needs to apologize, he needs to pay for the window and make up with his friend. However, he got a rush when he threw that rock. He got a sense of satisfaction when the window broke. So over the next week, he does it again and again and again. And before you know it, he's broken a dozen windows, caused thousands of dollars in damage. And now he's not just a bad kid. He's just not just someone unwilling to sit and talk and work things out with a friend. He's now a deviant who has a criminal problem. So primary and secondary differences are very important at the symbolic interactions level, at the micro level. When we do something once and we know we're being deviant, we're going to get a reaction. When we do it again and keep doing it, consciously we know we're doing it, we're going to get a different reaction. And eventually, it could be a stigma that we bring upon ourselves. So it could be physical, moral, even tribal. A stigma could be, the definition is that it's a general social label that changes your behavior towards a person. So I meet this 12, 13-year-old kid in the supermarket, and my 12, 13-year-old goes, "Oh, you know who that is? Oh my gosh, I've heard of him." So I see him and he's kind of dressed not great. And he's looking around like maybe I wanted to be nice to him and I'd offer to buy him a candy bar. But now that I know who he is, nope, I'm not going to do anything for this person because they're not a good person. So they've got a stigma. Now this could be a personal, this operating at the symbolic interactions level, the stigma could be at the micro level as well. The stigma could also be at the macro level. Could be that there is a mental illness or PSTD kind of thing, which comes from many different sources, or a certain type of character flaw, somebody who talks too much, somebody who has a nervous tic, something that our society deems as not normal. So that's coming from the macro level. Society says this is not normal, but it's operating at the micro level. So from the macro to the micro, and we say, this is not normal. And so I'm looking at this behavior as a symbol to say, this is a deviant person. Do not react, do not interact with this person. So the stigma has serious consequences in terms of opportunities available or not available to certain people. So ex-cons as well, right? You go apply for a job and you got all the qualifications, you've got a couple of good references, but you got this 3-year work history gap. What's with that? Well, as soon as you say, well, I was in county prison for 3 years, you just turned your chances on their head of getting that job, right? Because the stigma is, if you have done jail time, you must not be a good employee. That may or may not be true, but it's a stigma from the macro level and what society believes about people who have had certain experiences that's operational at the micro level and how people will react to you. So here's a really good video on that from Deva Prager and hiring practices.
You, for your PhD thesis a while back, did something very innovative in social science, particularly for graduate students. You did an actual experiment on human beings. Can you tell us what you did?
Sure. So for the field experiment that I did for my dissertation in Milwaukee, I hired a group of young men to pose as job applicants, and I assigned them fictitious matched resumes that reflected identical levels of education and work experience. These were college students, but they were young men that posed as high school graduates with limited work experience. And I carefully selected and matched the young men so that they were very similar in their physical characteristics and their interpersonal style. And I sent them all over the city of Milwaukee applying for entry-level jobs. And for each job, I sent 2 young men who were matched young men of the same race. One man presented himself as having a felony conviction. He reported on the application form that he'd been convicted of a drug felony. He'd spent 18 months of time in prison and had just been released a month before. And so I was comparing to what extent evidence of a felony conviction affected hiring rates among otherwise equally qualified applicants. I sent 2 young white men and 2 young black men to apply for these jobs. So I also wanted to see how race and the interaction between race and criminal background affected the hiring prospects.
And drum roll, what did you find about the marker of criminal record?
So there were a couple of big findings from the study. One is that a criminal record had a huge impact on hiring outcomes. Whites were about half as likely to receive a callback as equally qualified non-offenders. For blacks, the effect was even a little bit larger. One of the other big findings that was a surprise to me was just about the direct effects of race and racial discrimination. So a black man with no criminal background fared no better than a white applicant just released from prison.
And how do you explain that? Are the employers simply racist and active bigots, or is there something else going on?
Well, it's hard to explain exactly what's motivating employers' decisions. I think that there's some degree of old-fashioned racism in place. But in my conversations with employers following this field experiment in both Milwaukee and New York, I've come to believe that employers don't harbor conscious animosity towards blacks and really don't see themselves as discriminating. Much of what happens is a very unconscious process where I think employers are attempting to select the best candidate for their job, but are affected by all kinds of pervasive and largely unconscious stereotypes that result in privileging or preferring a white candidate to a black candidate.
How generalizable is this particular part of the hiring process for these kind of jobs in Milwaukee for this age group and so forth? What kind of general conclusions can we draw? So you addressed that by, or at least partially addressed that by replicating the experiment in New York. And what did you find?
Yeah, so one concern about a field experiment that takes place in a single city is that there may be features of that city that make the results really unique. And Milwaukee is a city that has a long history of racial antagonism. It's one of the most segregated cities in the country. And there are lots of reasons to think that maybe preferences for whites or for non-offenders are different in Milwaukee than would be true in the rest of the country. And so with my colleague Bruce Western, we replicated the study in New York City, which is a city we chose partly because of its incredible heterogeneity, diversity. It's known as a cosmopolitan and very open-minded city. So we wanted to see to what extent these effects replicated. And we found startlingly similar results in New York.
So that's interesting. And, you know, I would say that they should also look at a non-metro area. So if you're doing it in Milwaukee and New York, what about going outside of Milwaukee to another city in Wisconsin, Waukesha, you know, for lack of a better, you know, Happy Days, Sam. In New York, what about going to, excuse me, if we went out to Long Island, or if we went to upstate, say Ithaca, are we going to find similar things by changing the size of the community where we're doing the experiment? The point is that we have to be careful not to overly generalize the findings of any given social experiment. We need to understand the population in which it was conducted and how far we can generalize our findings beyond that population. Unless we've got really solid data and good understanding of similarities of the population, the answer is usually not very far. So, well, if we were in a real class, we'd discuss it more, but yeah, because this is a big sticking point of mine. It's important to understand that we don't overgeneralize. Anyway, thinking of symbolic interactionism, labeling theory. We see how they're labeled and accepted. You know, people are labeled as obnoxious. And enough people say that, that's going to then be considered a true label, whether they really are or not. And then some people actually, what happens with symbolic interactionism, we're going to talk about this with sociology of education. People behave the way they think someone with their label should behave, because I'm reacting to what I believe you expect me to be as you see me and I respond to you, that looking glass theory. So you know that people consider that people have said, oh, he's just an obnoxious guy. Well, okay, I'll be obnoxious. And then you reinforce that label that then becomes a stigma, and you're done for socially, right? It's very, very important to understand why you're doing what you're doing. You step back and look at the situation. Maybe you are acting like a jerk, but maybe you're doing it because you know people expect you to act that way, or vice versa. Maybe you're acting very submissive and demure to other people and don't stand up for yourself. Well, maybe that's because that's what people expect from you. And so you've given yourself a label, you've allowed a label to attach to yourself. Well, that's also using agency, your power of choice, in order to be conforming to a label, whereas maybe you want to deviate a little bit from that label so that people change their vision of you, and on this micro symbolic interactionist level will then respond to you differently. Maybe people will respect you more if you change the label that is pinned on you. So the label is the liar. I'm sorry, label is you're lying, and you're lying, and then you become a liar. Right. I apologize. Because I was on in another brain there. But yeah, so stigma is one who is known to be a liar, but they've earned that label, that stigma, because they fed into the label that they were given. So it's a similar thing. It's the same coin. You lie enough because it's expected, you become known as a liar. So 5 techniques of label or stigma neutralization. You try to neutralize the label. I'm not responsible for this because, and you try to deny your responsibility, but at some level you are, because you haven't changed perhaps your actual behavior or your response in a given situation from what's expected. Maybe you say, well, nobody got hurt. What's the big deal? Well, it's because you are deviant. And remember, because within your network, whether, and we're on the symbolic and on the micro level, within your little network there, it's whatever you did is termed deviant. It doesn't matter if somebody got hurt or not. The point is that you're deviant. Maybe you're denied that there was a victim. Maybe somebody did get hurt, but you are then going to justify it because they deserved. And then finally, you are, next to last, you are condemning those. Why do you judge me? You do things that are deviant. Well, maybe they're not deviant within your group. Maybe they're deviant within society, but not in the group. So you have to do the analysis at the micro and the meso and the macro level to find out where is the deviance kicking in and whether or not it applies to your group and your context or not, or an appeal to higher loyalties. I had to tell my friends, well, I did this here in this group, but actually it was because I had to do something for another group. Well, that's not gonna help, because that's just gonna make you more deviant and probably get kicked out of the group, which maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want to sever all, not just weaken, but sever all your ties to that group. And this is a good way to do it, to do something that is in accordance with a negative label or stigma that you've obtained. And people ask, why do you continue to do that? And you say, well, because my other reference group over here, they're my friends, and that's the network that I want to be in. So they go, okay, fine. You're no longer with us. You're with them. There's also differential association theory, which is fascinating. That on the micro level, we learn to deviate by those we associate in our lives. And of course, this is deviation that is a bit complex because it's conforming to those with whom you associate, family, friends, neighbors, but it's deviating from social norms at the meso or macro level. In example, 50% of people in prison also have a father, mother, brother, sister that have committed a crime. So it's like a disease, it's catching. You learn how to be deviant in certain ways from those with whom you are closest, which becomes normal and accepted within that micro level network, but it's deviant at the community or at the societal level. And so I have provided for you a really good website paper on this, about over incarceration and how it's a huge topic, but the important part is about families and what to do about families who are divided because of an incarceration, but also understanding that we don't want to provide opportunity for the deviance to be passed down generationally. So there's 2 competing values that need to be considered when bringing together adult offenders with innocent children. Yes, the parent-child relationship is of a high American value, and we need to facilitate it, and we need to bring those people together. At the same time, we also know that children of offenders are more likely to offend than children of non-offenders. And how do we break that cycle? So it's a both and, not an either or. How do people know how to act when they're high? Why is this even a question? Well, it's because deviance, again, is not always about what you decide to do. It's about how you decide to conform. So when you decide to smoke that first joint or take that first hit, especially when it's marijuana, which is a very, very low psychotropic altering drug, psychologically altering drug. Do you know there's actually no one way to be high? People actually learn how to be high from the people with whom they get high. If you give somebody a joint and they've never had one before and they've never been around people who are getting high, they might get relaxed, but their behavior actually doesn't change that much. But when they get high around people who normally get high, they look and they observe this the looking glass again. They look at what other people are doing. Other people expect them to act like them, and so they do. Guess what? It also works in religious situations. Pentecostal Christians, depending upon the Pentecostal tradition from which you come, will depend on how you exercise the practice of speaking in tongues. And if you come up with your own way of doing it, you are going to be probably considered deviant by your immediate religious group. And they're going to tell you can't do it that way. It's not legitimate. So you have to legitimize yourself by conforming, even though on the societal level, you're deviant. So let's see how these things can work in multiple layers of analysis, looking at it on one hand on symbolic interactionism, on how you get to be conforming by being deviant. And on another level, look at how you are being deviant by conforming from the micro level. If that doesn't make sense, please ask me. It's fascinating stuff, but you have to think about it. Control theory, Tavish Hershey, we all want to commit deviant acts, but we don't because of inner and outer controls. This is very, very important. And it's important to know that the stronger the internal controls, the less likely deviances could occur. Again, this goes back to agency and whether or not I can choose to do something that is nonconformist or deviant or not. And some people have stronger internal controls than other people. Part of it is our personality, our biology, how we just came out of the womb. And part of it is our socialization, whether or not we were given those controls as children, or whether those controls were played down, or whether we really were not inculcated with personal controls. Often those controls come from religious beliefs as well as family morals, or even your own conscience. Again, those are different ways to look at. Outer controls, of course, from attachments to people who want you to be controlled. That your expectation, you're meeting the expectation of the people you're with. Commitment that you have made. If you're in the military and you have sworn a vow to follow orders, you are going to follow orders, even if it may go against your personal desire. You are told to arm yourself, take that weapon into the field and kill the enemy. Your conscience may say, I don't want to kill anybody, but you know that you have taken a commitment because you are committing to a larger value than your own personal desire not to kill anybody, and therefore you must follow orders and you will do it. Ethics and involvement in society, which is on kind of along the same lines. When we feel an ethical constraint against doing something unethical, then we will, even though if we want to, we will cease from that behavior. So this theory views crime as an outcome of an imbalance between impulses towards criminal activity and controls that deter it. Or not even criminal activity, just deviant activity, right? It doesn't have to be formal deviance. It could be informal deviance, which is usually ethical, right? Unless you're talking about embezzlement or white collar crimes, most ethics are on the informal level. So control theorists hold that criminals are rational beings, and all deviants are rational beings who will act to maximize their own reward unless they are rendered unable to do so through social or physical controls, which is fascinating, right? So everybody presuming that you're a rational being, meaning you're trying for your own best outcome. So what rational means, that you are trying for your own best outcome, that you will act to maximize your reward in any situation, which means more than likely you're going to be deviant in order to get what you want, which doesn't set up for very good systems of trust in any given social situation, but we'll move on from that. Broken window theory, Philip Zimbardo. Also, we've got a paper for that. Oh, that's Hershey. Broken windows theory. We've got a website for that. James Wilson, he came up with this, basically, that when you walk through a neighborhood and you see no broken windows, you're less likely to break a window. But if you see broken windows, it's a metaphor for any visible sign of disorder. If you see broken windows, then basically you're not you're not going to care as much about breaking a window. So you see 1 or 2, you're more likely to break a window than you see none. You see 4, 5, or 6, your chances of breaking a window are going up, which is why it used to be, I don't know anymore, when I lived in South Central Los Angeles, it was important to understand that if, and this was slightly after this Windows theory became popular, if you get tagged, your property, by graffiti, something gets broken, a window gets a rock through it, you fix it up immediately, because the sign then to the person, notice we're using symbolic interactionism, the sign to the person who committed that act is that we're not going to let your act stand. Therefore, we're taking you down because we're taking your act down. We're cleaning the graffiti, we're repairing the door, we're repairing the window. We're not going to let the car sit here with no wheels on it. We're going to remove the car that had the door ripped off, whatever, because, and it's not a statement of property, it's a statement of person, and you are not acceptable from your act. And actually, vandalism and crime goes down when a community responds to the deviant act by restoring order. A very, very important theory that I wish was operationalized more in our cities today, where crime and deviance and vandalism are just off the record, off the anything reasonable. Well, there's no reasonable, but you know what I mean. So moving on to macro level, conflict theory, that deviance is deliberately chosen for and political in nature, right? That the law is actually used as a means to oppress the masses, that really there should be no speed limit, but we should allow everyone to do what is right in their own eyes, and that by maintaining a speed limit, we are actually oppressing people. That's an extreme example, I know, but it's setting up the elite in government against the common in society, and those using conflict theory to set up class warfare will often use crazy stuff, just the way it is. Every once in a while, we do have to show someone from the upper classes is showcased so as to appear fair. So right, Bernie Madoff, he has set up that Ponzi scheme. I actually got burned by Bernie Madoff in the early 1990s through an organization I was a member of, and money was lost. And then I discovered, yes, there were other people doing similar things. They did not get tried or put in jail, but he did. And it's very frustrating that, yes, there is something to the conflict theory viewpoint that there are elites who get away with things that normal people can't. Absolutely, that is true. However, you also have to be careful that people aren't utilizing conflict theory to set up a false situation of competition where none actually exists. So it's a both and. Again, it depends on what, it depends on the situation. Sociological answer is often it depends. Remember, conflict theory is macro. Always be sure to frame the situation on the macro level. So Bernie Madoff situation is not Bernie Madoff. It's actually elites, economic, social elites, and how they are treating the masses, those people who desire to invest and to make money on their investment. The elites are taking advantage of them. That is a macro framing of the micro situation. Be careful that you do that, or simply don't use conflict theory for a micro situation. Use symbolic interactionism and vice versa. So looking at more at some theoretical, well, let's look at this again. Just looking at this picture. What are some assumptions that we can make? Gated community, American flag, warning, this premises are being monitored, no trespassing. So there's a number of ways that people could violate norms here, right? Going through the stop sign, going through the line, not showing their, not using their key card if they have one, trespassing, bringing a Chinese flag instead of an American flag, a lot of different things that could be done to show deviance against a gated community of this sort that looks to be, I don't know, somewhere in the South. It's interesting to think of possibilities. And then this photo, A little bit different, right? That there's some things that it's more a context where it's more difficult to be deviant actually would be in a prison situation. On the other hand, there's a lot of subtext deviance going on that is not realized, but it's not deviance because it's standard practice for the prison population to have drugs and other paraphernalia and money transactions going on and instructions being taken from the inside to the outside and from the outside to the inside, all under the guise of we are in a controlled environment. Well, you're not actually in a controlled environment. Are you deviant? Well, you're deviant at the meso level for that institution, but you're not deviant at the micro level for what is expected of a prisoner. And so the guards are looking for that conformity to being as a prisoner so that they can prosecute it as a deviance based on the meso institution. So again, there's a lot that we can think of and different ways to go about doing this analysis. And let's see, this research is available. Oh, yes, here, the mark of a criminal record. So we take from Deva's interview that we saw, pull up her paper that's available from 2003. It's really good stuff. And what it is that marks somebody as a criminal and in different contexts and what the consequences are of receiving that stigma. Looking at incarceration rates across different countries, you'll see, yes, the United States is still at the top, and there's reasons for that. And there's different reasons that Rwanda, United States, and Russia are in the top. I hope the United States is still less corrupt than the Russian Federation, because my standard answer for this from 2016 is that much incarceration in the Russian Federation is by elites against those who have not actually violated the law, but have become inconvenient or pose some sort of a threat to the political infrastructure. Whereas in the United States, I hope that the majority of incarceration is because of actual violations of the law. And Rwanda is different than US, or it's corruption, but it's a different kind of corruption from the Russian Federation. It's less formal and more about who controls little fiefdoms rather than who controls the society. Are people more conforming in Japan and Nigeria, and that's why they have such low incarceration rates? Well, the answer actually is yes, especially in Japan and Switzerland. Homogeneous societies of not many different cultures interacting at once, meaning one culture can have hegemony or authority over what is deviant and what is conforming, and the expectations for individuals at the micro level, meso level, and macro level. When you have a singularity of culture, you're going to have much less deviance, and therefore you're going to have fewer formal sanctions resulting in incarceration. That's another reason the United States is higher here, because we have so many cultures interacting with different expectations, and therefore the society as in general has more deviations because of all the subcultures located underneath it. Talking about being locked up in the United States, and we could have a whole class on this. Looking at mass incarceration, isn't it interesting that we go by age? Of course, 25 to 34, 18, young 20s, second only to 25 to 30. And why are the reasons for that? This is your physical prime of life. 25 is when your brain finishes forming. So a lot of people haven't had, even though it's high, it's because of teenage stupidity and lack of a frontal cortex being closed. Whereas here, this is really the choice that I've made, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm in my prime of life, so I'm going to do it. Why do people in their older years, prime working years, prime income generating, and then older not commit as many crimes? Well, it's because they don't have the energy. So if we wanted, though, to talk about equity in terms of incarceration by age, well, we'd really have to arrest a whole lot more of people over 55, as well as people in their prime earning ages, in order to come to equity. And we'd have to let a lot of criminals here go. I don't think that's what we really want, although some people are arguing for it. By ethnicity, we have interesting rates. Do we really want to increase the number of Asian Americans who are arrested? Or do Asian Americans actually commit fewer crimes than Hispanics or Irish and German, or people from Laos and Nigeria, who, if they were in Nigeria, may not be seen as deviant as they are here. Well, and again, also we have to, and this is also, we set this up, I mean, as race, race or ethnicity, but we also have to look at what's missing from this data. What's missing from this data? Well, up here, how many crimes are committed by 18 to 24-year-olds against 18 to 24-year-olds versus how many crimes are committed by 18 to 24-year-olds against 55 and older? It's actually mostly here against their own. However, when we go to 25 to 34, more crime is committed by this age group against higher age groups than within the age group. The same thing is true here, similar patterns. More crimes are committed within the Black community, within the white community, within the Hispanic community, than between communities. And so there are certainly cultural variables to be considered when considering this data and looking at potential causes and consequences. Always ask what's not here. Same for male, female. I have actually worked, I taught college courses in a women's prison, and I used to work in a male prison. I can tell you, these are very different types of offenders. Very, very different. They have different attitudes on the inside, as well as, and their attitudes on the inside are as different as their acts of deviance on the outside. Women are not men and men are not women. And there's very clear data to show that. So in order to gain equity, should we just start arresting more females just because they're deviant, or only when they actually commit a crime? Same for marital status. Yes, married people do commit fewer criminal acts than those who are never married. Why widowed? Widowed goes to the age issue. Never married goes to an issue of culture and parents. Also, never marrieds who commit a crime often have a parent or sibling who has committed a crime. And the sibling is also probably not going to be married. Same for education. Why is it those with less than high school have lower incarceration rates than those with high school? Because those with high school have more opportunity to commit a deviant act, a crime, than those with less than high school education. So again, what's missing in the data? What are we not seeing? What do I not know? Can I draw any conclusions from this data set? The answer is usually it depends, but it's often no. Looking at aging inmates. It's interesting that 39 has gone down, 40 and older has gone up, 18 to 24 has gone down. That's really good, right? But then we look at recidivism, rearrest. Well, it's all gone up. How do we explain that? Well, we really need to look deeper into the data. And this prison gender gap is just kind of annoying because, again, do we just want to go out and start arresting women? Is that what we really want to do? Is that going to bring equity to the criminal justice system? Or is there a male problem that we need to deal with? I think it's a male issue, personally, speaking as a guy. Violent crime. We've actually seen a reduction in violent crime since the mid-2010s, interestingly, and then it started to go up again. Drug crime arrests have gone down steadily since 2007. Property crime, slight reduction since 2007. Some of this is because of change in drug laws. Some of it is a acceptance of cannabis as a non-problematic drug, although it really is. Do not drive high. It is at least as bad as driving drunk. unfortunately, we haven't, the realities of use have not caught up to the acceptance of the product. Interestingly enough, women's prison population has grown faster than men. Well, this goes back to largely unmarried women. And a lot of them have children out of wedlock, of course, and have not been able to prove themselves, to legitimate themselves to their families, because their families expected them to get married and have a child within a marriage, but they can't. So they legitimate themselves first by getting welfare, and then by going out and trying to increase their status in life, legitimating themselves to their family, to their friends, to their network by doing something criminal. And that's what landed them in prison, which starts with probably didn't have a dad at home themselves and didn't meet the expectations of their reference group, and then tried to legitimate themselves in other ways that landed them in jail. Men have different reasons. Some of them are legitimizing, that they're trying to find acceptance within their group, but also it could be opportunity, or it could simply be guys do things that are stupid. And most of these, of course, are young men without having finished forming their prefrontal cortex, and they just do stupid things. Interestingly, death penalty opinions, which note that this is actual incarceration statistics. This is actual opinions, two totally different types of data. We can have a discussion on why these numbers have gone down and then up. Those opposed went down, then up. Those against, those in favor went up and then down. And now we've got, almost a 50-50 here, with slightly few more in favor of the death penalty, slightly fewer opposed. And we can look at social reasons why that. Again, there's a lot of variables. There's a lot of data that's missing from this graph that would help us understand exactly what's going on. Please, please, please don't look at a graph and think you know everything that's going on in a situation and that you can draw any conclusions. If I give you a graph, one of the correct answers is going to be, there's not enough information in this one graph in order to form a solid conclusion. Security and terrorism, talk about that all day, not gonna. I just talked to you a little bit about reporting on crime and crime statistics, but here's some more. Violent crime rates, property crime rates. It is going down, but interesting isn't interesting that rape and murder are kind of steady. Burglary and motor theft have not gone down as much as larceny and theft. And then, of course, we've got differences by gender and ethnicity. And isn't it interesting that females have a higher rate than men to report crimes? Blacks have a higher reporting rate than whites of reporting crimes, but blacks also have a higher rate of crime and higher rate of inter-ethnic crime as opposed to intra-ethnic crime. We would expect the people in urban areas to have a higher rate of reporting, I would think, but they also have a higher rate of crimes at the bottom line than do people in rural areas. One reason why I like small communities better than cities. Vehicle accidents and homicides go down while suicide rates are going up. Interesting. Something to think about. Why do men commit suicide greater than women? Embeddedness in a network. That is the answer when all the data is considered, because men have fewer network connections in smaller networks. Women have more resilience in different situations, emotional trauma, because they have more connections in larger networks, and those connections are stronger. Men have fewer connections in smaller networks, and the connections are weaker. That is the bottom line. The more connections, the more boundaries, the stronger connections, the lower emotional trauma, the lower the suicide rates. We've already talked about this guy. Don't know why I left it in. Cybercrime, we can talk about that. We can apply the same principles to cybercrime that we have been applying to physical crime. Unanswered questions, we've already talked about this. Can we reduce crime through new policing? How do we know is very important. Don't do something unless you think you know what the answer is going to be based on good data. not just based on your gut or what would be nice. Looking at the number of police increasing and then crime dropping. Getting rid of the police is usually not a good idea if you want crime to go down. As a matter of fact, in those places where they've reduced police because of the stigma of being a policeman, therefore people have been resigning and leaving the police force, crime has actually gone up and innocent people are being hurt and worse. So be careful of that. Know the whole story, know the data, new surveillance technology. There's a good video here of the theme and the issues. I won't show it to you now. Please watch it though. How do we build stronger communities? Community policing, shaming. Yes, those are good ways. Concept quiz, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those may be on a test coming to you soon. And be able to walk through these paragraphs, walk yourselves through, talk about them together, talk about them with your family, talk about them on your own, write about it. Come up with some good answers because they may also come to a test near you. And that's it for chapter 7. If you have any questions, please put them in discussion for chapter 7. Please contact me, get on my calendar. Let's have a 30-minute conversation. Let's have a 15-minute conversation. Let me get to know you. What are your concerns? What are your strengths? What do you want to build in yourself? What do you want to learn sociologically? How do you plan to adapt these principles into your life? Hope you all have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.